and welcome to the 45th anniversary celebration of the National Association of Black Journalists. I'm your host, Kay Ingram, and I am a proud NABJ baby. Now, first, a little bit about myself. I first joined NABJ at the local level here in New York as a senior in high school under the late Michael Feeney. I then went on to join the national chapter and later participate in student projects. While in college, I was the vice president of our collegiate chapter that went on to win Student Chapter of the Year. In my job as a producer and a reporter, I'm known to wear many hats, but the hat that I am most proud of wearing is being a member of NABJ. NABJ has played a huge role in my career and in my life, which is why I'm so honored to be joining you all this evening in celebration of this great organization, of this great family. Now, things may look a little different this year, but not even a pandemic can stop us from celebrating and paying homage to our roots and the 44 founders that have made all of this possible. So tonight, we want to thank you for taking the time to log on and to share in this momentous occasion. I also wanted to take this moment to share a few housekeeping rules, so please pay attention. Please remain muted during the program until the host calls on you, and you will be unmuted by the Zoom host as well. If you'd like to follow along, the program is available on the NABJ website, but the link can also be found in the chat. We have a fun and interactive Q&A session with the founders, including a really fun trivia during the program. So be sure to put on your thinking caps and submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to introduce NABJ co-founder Sandra Long Dawson Weaver, and as chair of the Founders Task Force. As chair, she served as an integral part in the planning to make this virtual event a reality and a success. Founder Long.
Good evening and welcome to the 45th anniversary celebration of NABJ. I'm Sandra Dawson Long Weaver, one of the organization's 44 co-founders, chair of the Founders Task Force, and an active member of the Nashville chapter of NABJ. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you this evening. On this date in 1975, we huddled in a hotel room in Washington, D.C. and signed the yellow legal pad creating NABJ. This shows you how technology has changed over the years. Back then, it was word of mouth, long distance phone calls, and letters to get us together. But we persevered. Personally, I was a reporter for the Wilmington, Delaware News Journal. My idols were Ida B. Wells and Alex Haley. I grew up reading the Evening Capital in Annapolis, Maryland, and I was on the staff of the Tally-Ho, my high school newspaper, where I had my first front page story, and it was about Alex Haley and his research on roots. My generation of journalists was starting to break through into white newsrooms. It was virgin territory for all involved during the changing times of our history. I retired from the Philadelphia Inquirer in 2011 as the first African-American female vice president for news for the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Daily News. To me, NABJ was a way to connect with other Black journalists and to increasingly bring more Black journalists into mainstream media in order to have our voices heard and our community's vision realized. Our goal as founders was to work together to advocate for more Black journalists, not only to report the stories, but to be at every level, in every role in the newsrooms. In short, we all wanted to change the world, and we have. Your founders include journalists who have been awarded Pulitzers and Peabodys and Emmys and other national and local state awards. They have been reporters, investigative journalists, columnists, editors at all levels, news directors, general managers, authors, and college professors in the United States, reporters and correspondents covering stories from around the world. They have founded other news organizations and overcome many obstacles. We've seen NABJ grow from the 44 to more than 4,000. Over the years, our membership has served as a source of pride and support of our own excellence when we have been or are invisible to the larger media industry. We have been role models and mentors, inspiring generations of Black youth to join, perfect their skills, impact our profession, and shape our world. We have been a checkpoint of accountability to politicians at all levels of society. We've been a stepping stone to building and showing leadership skills from within. We've been a bridge to and platform for journalists ranging from small communities in the US to across the African diaspora. We've been a model for the creation of and partnerships with the National Associations of Hispanic, Native American, and Asian journalists. And finally, a champion for ensuring that Black journalists can serve in any position in the media industry. Tonight, you will hear from many of the founders who are still active. You will learn a little more of our history. We will pay a tribute to our most recently deceased founder, John C. White, and honor founder Dwayne Wickham for his contributions over the last 45 years. And now, let the celebration begin. Kay?
Thank you so much, Founder Long, and thank you for the ways that you've helped change the world as well. Love when you said that. Now, this celebration would not be complete without hearing from our president, Dorothy Tucker, and executive director, Drew Barry. We begin with President Tucker.
And good evening, NABJ family. Imagine what it would have been like to be in the room, December 12th, exactly 45 years ago today, Washington, D.C., Sheraton Park Hotel. Imagine the energy, many sharing similar stories of their experiences as Black journalists working in white newsrooms. They had come together because they realized that there was a need to organize, to join forces, to advocate for each other and for the Black community. We come together tonight, this evening, to thank the 44 men and women who had the vision, the fortitude, the commitment to establish the National Association of Black Journalists. Tonight, we pay tribute to the founders of this great organization, and there are so many who made this night possible. I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to tonight's production, but a special shout out to founder Sandra Dawson Long Weaver and founder Allison Davis. We have an extraordinary history, and tonight I am happy to announce we are ready to take the first steps to digitize and archive our newspapers, videos, and other treasured materials. And as 22nd president of NABJ, I am humbled at the opportunity and proud to carry out the mission our founders established 45 years ago. Our organization is built on a strong foundation. Founders, to each and every one of you, I thank you sincerely for the sacrifices you made. It is because of you that we are more than 4,000 strong. Enjoy the evening.
And now to you, Director Barry.
Great, thank you very much. Look, little did our founders know that this day, 45 years ago in Washington, D.C., that they were birthing an organization that would become 4,000 strong. However, even from the very beginning, NABJ was an organization with a membership encompassing some of the brightest journalism minds in the world. The resilient and influential NABJ has opened doors for talented journalists through advocacy, training, and networking opportunities. NABJ has a critical role in the latest, I'll call it, reawakening of America regarding the prevalence of systemic racism by shedding light on injustices and advocating for change. The things our founders started addressing 45 years ago. Yes, advocacy is an uphill battle, but there are promising new signs of improvement through the promotions and hirings of a number of very, very talented Black journalists in the upper echelons of management, specifically president, senior vice president, executive editor positions. That's wonderful. Not only is it the right thing for companies to do, but it opens the door for bigger revenue streams for those who do the right thing through additional content offerings and potentially larger audiences. We will not let our founders down. We will continue the efforts that they started. We hope you enjoy this celebration tonight. And thank you, founders, for opening up many doors for me and a multitude of others. Thank you.
Thank you. And a thank you to you, President Tucker and Executive Director Barry. Now, we want to take a moment to also pay tribute individually to each of the 44 founders who put pen to paper on December 12, 1975, to make all of this possible. One of those people was co-founder Joe Davidson. Now, he's currently with the Washington Post, but at the time of the launch of NABJ, he was with the Philadelphia Bulletin. It is so important to celebrate every Black journalist who had the courage to step up and be involved and to say their names. Co-founder Davidson, thank you for joining us.
Hello, NABJ. I'm Joe Davidson, a co-founder of the National Association of Black Journalists. It's my pleasure to read the founder's roll on this, our 45th anniversary. Norma Adams Wade, Carol Bartell, Edward Blackwell, Paul Brock, Reginald Bryant, Maureen Bunyan, Crispin Campbell, Charlie Cobb, Marilyn Darling, Leon Dash, Joe Davidson, Allison Davis, Paul Delaney, William Dilday, Sandra Rosen Dillard, Joel Dreyfus, Sam Ford, David Gibson, Sandra Gilliam Beal, Bob Greenlee, Martha Griffin, Durwood Hall, Bob Hayes, Vernon Jarrett, Mal Johnson, Tony Jones, H. Chuku Lee, Claude Lewis, Sandra Dawson Long Weaver, Pluria Marshall, Asa Moore, Louis Overby, Les Payne, Alex Poinsett, Claudia Polly, Richard Rambeau, W. Curtis Riddle, Max Robinson, Charlotte Roy, Vince Saunders, Chuck Stone, Jeannie Thornton, Francis Ward, John C. White, Dwayne Wickham.
Now that you all know who was involved in launching NABJ, it's also important to understand how we got here. There were many events that led up to that group of 44 journalists that met up at a hotel in Washington 45 years ago today. Here's a look back.
We met on December 12th at the Sheraton Hotel in Washington, D.C. We came from different parts of the country.
The meeting was held in conjunction with a gathering of black elected officials from around the country.
We were one of the last groups of African Americans at the national level to organize. There was a National Association of Black Social Workers. There was a National Association of Black Lawyers.
The doctors get together, don't they? The dentists have associations. Everybody had an association with black journalists.
So the whole idea was to improve the number of blacks in journalism overall in America, to improve the treatment of those who had jobs, and to improve the coverage of the black community and the third world community.
We didn't get promoted. We didn't get certain jobs like covering major events, like covering the White House, covering Congress. And so we formed NABJ to put pressure on companies.
I remember being huddled, sitting in the floor and huddled and listening to the conversation about why we needed an organization and what this would mean.
This was really only several years after the Kerner Commission, and the Kerner Commission really documented what frankly we already knew, and that is that the mainstream media really did not cover the black communities properly, and that's to put it generously.
A yellow legal pad was passed around, and all of us signed our names to this pad, so you'll see the 44 names.
We talked about the principles, we adopted the bylaws. And there were others really who only because they were absent at that meeting, they aren't considered founders or co-founders, but they in some ways laid the groundwork at the local level. After that meeting, I went around trying to determine all of the black journalists in my region. And now this was before email, let alone things like Twitter and texting, or cell phones even. And so we would just try to contact as best we could people in every city and ask them to spread the word.
We didn't have a constitution until 1978. And as a parliamentarian, I was kind of charged to chair the bylaws committee. But we were able to craft a wonderful document with just a few changes and additions. And it was that strong foundation that still guides the organization today.
I was the fourth president. The first president was Chuck Stone, of course. And I shouldn't say of course, but he was. And the second one was Vernon Jarrett. And the third one was Bob Reed.
I was making enough money to support my kids and myself, but not to get an organization started. And of course, almost all of it came out of Max Robinson's pocket and Maureen Bunyan's pocket. They committed themselves financially to support it. When I sent out the initial letters to ask people to come to Washington, all of that was paid for by Maureen Bunyan and Max Robinson. When we announced the formation of the National Association of Black Journalists, the Philadelphia Inquirer said we were racist. Our first elected treasurer of the National Association of Black Journalists was an anchor out of the CBS affiliate in Toledo, Ohio. They said, "Do you want to be on air? Do you want to be the national treasurer?" They made it very clear to her that they were firing her. And so she had to give up that position that she had been elected to.
Piece by piece, we developed a census of black journalists in our regions, and then we met for the first convention in Houston.
We'd get together, we'd have these little conversations, then we'd have these criticism conversations, and then we'd leave, and then we'd come back the next year. But we were pretty small, so we all knew each other. But Atlanta, it really kind of grew.
Some of the plaques up front here that NABJ was kind enough to award me with. Here's some founders medals, and I'm very proud, honestly, to say that I've been to every single convention. And I think I'm the only one.
NABJ is that place you come to every year for renewal. Every year you get a resurgence of energy. It helps to keep the fires burning in my gut for the practice of journalism.
NABJ maintained my sanity. NABJ is my family. NABJ is the place where every year when we convene, there is pure, abject joy that we are seeing each other again. And it literally is, we survived another year to come together.
I think NABJ has lived up to many of its goals. It continues, of course, to be an educational institution, helping to train journalists. It continues to be a networking organization.
The chance to have people who are in the business help you get where you're trying to go.
The chief question that we face as African American journalists is not whether we individually will succeed, but whether we collectively will succeed.
Nearly every job that I've had in the industry has been a result of the relationships forged through NABJ.
I'm Rahel Solomon. And I'm Jeanette Reyes. So Bernstein is upgrading Southwest authorities in California.
It was student projects that I was a part of. And it was the first time that as a Black journalist that I felt seen. And I met so many people who were on the same journey as me.
A thank you to the brave, brilliant, and courageous founders of NABJ, all 44 of you, to thank you for giving us a space to operate in, big shoes to fill, a framework from which to gauge and judge and act upon our mission as journalists, as Black journalists.
Wow. Acting on that mission indeed. Tremaine said it perfectly. Thank you for that great look back at the history of NABJ. And now to the discussion portion of our program. Joining us tonight, some of the 44 members who had a seat at the table exactly 45 years ago today, December 12th, 1975. We have Leon Dash with us. He worked at the Washington Post. Allison Davis is also with us. In 1975, she was with WBZ-TV in Boston. We have Sam Ford with us. He was at WCCO in Minneapolis in 1975, and Claudia Pauly, who worked for NBC News. Now, for the first question. Before we take a look back, let's test your memory just a little bit. Now to anyone, especially the founders, what was the day of the week that you met on December 12th, 1975? Any guesses?
Saturday.
I heard Saturday. Did I mention the winner might get a car? Up the stakes a bit. All right, so Saturday is the final answer. Ding, ding, ding. Well, close. The correct answer was December 12th, a Friday. That's right. So December 12th was a Friday in 1975. And we spoke to some of your fellow founders about what led you to that meeting. Let's take a listen.
When there were disturbances in the Black community, it was very commonplace for the only reporting you saw was what the cops said happened. And it was the Black journalists who were talking to the little old ladies on the steps of the row houses, talking to some of the kids with bandanas on their head.
The Watts riot in Los Angeles in 1965 was one good example. The Los Angeles Times was a very good newspaper at that time, but it had no Black reporters on staff. So when the Watts riot broke out, they found a maintenance man whose name escapes me at the moment. They found a Black maintenance man who worked at the paper, but not as a reporter, to venture into the Watts community, to simply report back to the paper, on what was happening, where fires were burning, where buildings had been destroyed, where there were people engaged in looting and all. And so this Black man did just that. That was the traditional practice at the time.
The case that actually led to NABJ was the FBI's attempt to get Earl Caldwell's notes. He was a New York Times reporter covering the Black Panther Party, and they tried to subpoena his notes, and the paper was lukewarm about defending him. And we formed an organization of Black journalists called Black Perspectives to defend Earl and raise money and raise awareness of his situation. And Black Perspectives was, I guess, the first organization of Black journalists working in mainstream media. And then that evolved into NABJ.
What was going on was, like I said, what was going on all over. And it took a lot of, I won't say courage. Well, yeah, I guess so, because I thought, okay, I'm going to sign this paper, join this group. I don't want to lose my job, but I do think this is so important that I'm just going to do this and see what happens.
There were probably another 10 or 15 people in the room who didn't dare sign because they were afraid they'd get fired from their jobs. I mean, there were a lot of news organizations that said if you join a Black journalist organization, you're no longer objective and you can't work for us. So there was a lot of tension, but we were very adamant that we needed an organization to represent our interests.
So, Leon, I would love to start with you. What was one defining moment that made you feel you needed to be a voice at that 1975 meeting in Washington? And then I have a follow-up question as well.
Well, that was a great meeting. I can still remember it. And considering the time, the room was full of smoke. Now, you wouldn't find that in a meeting today, but the room was still full of smoke. And I could hear the clinking of the ice cubes in the whiskey glasses. But it was all very civil and very pleasant with the smoke. For me, just 3 years before, myself and 6 other Black reporters had filed a discrimination complaint against the Washington Post. We were known as the Metro 7. And so this formation of the NABJ was part of a continuation of that effort, continuation of that need. I was a Washington Post reporter assigned to cover I think this was the second or third national meeting or annual meeting of the elected Black officials. So it was a great opportunity to also participate in the formation of the NABJ. I think I spent more time in the room for the formation of the NABJ than I did covering the meeting. But at the end, I did a wrap-up, very convenient wrap-up of what they had achieved and what they had achieved in the past and what they were planning to do.
But we do have one Q&A. So E.R. Shib wants to know of you, Leon. He wants to know if you could explain the hostile receptions many received from their employers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Blacks gathering to do anything was considered threatening and was treated with hostility, even in the newsroom at the Washington Post. Some Black reporters were nervous about standing in a group and talking, and would express that. There were a couple of people who attended that session at the hotel to form the NABJ who never put their names on that list. And I found out years later that when we were beginning to collate things like that, that they had never put their names on the list, 2 women that I know of, Black women, because they were afraid to be identified with an organization that was putting together Black journalists. More importantly, I'm also at the University of Illinois, the advisor to the student chapter of the NABJ. And I was interviewing the members just a month ago about what discrimination they faced on this campus in the heartland of Illinois, down in the central of Illinois. And the consensus was, and these were seniors, juniors, sophomores, and 1 freshman, the consensus was that the student chapter of the NABJ gave them all the foundation that they needed in a majority white university. And that was great to hear. I didn't know that until I began interviewing them, and they all expressed that. So that was very heartwarming. And they all make the point that I'm older than their parents, so they treat me like a grandfather. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine.
Right.
Well, that last question again came from E.R. Ship. She asked a great question, so thank you. And real quick, Claudia Pauley, I would love to hear from you as well. Tell me a little bit about that first meeting and what called you to it.
And actually, I was at NBC Sports when I first joined NABJ, and there were not any other women, much less Black women at NBC Sports when I first got there. And I was surrounded at that meeting by a number of friends and who still remain friends to this day. And I was able, once I came back to journalism in 1990 or 1989 bring NPR, which I had moved to National Public Radio by that time. And NPR became a bit more focused on the full dimension of its ability to tell the story. And today it's wonderful to hear the young journalists of national television and radio outlets use their voice to tell the story, because that's what it's all about. We are telling the stories that need to be told. And it really doesn't matter what color the stories are about or what particular race it may be about, but we approach it from our point of view, and that is invaluable in telling a full story.
Quiz time. Are you all ready? In 1975, President Gerald Ford called on America to recognize Black History Week. It became Black History Month the following year. We asked other founders about events this past summer in the wake of George Floyd's killing. Each person told us the calls for social justice now sound much like the messages from 1975. Now, before we get to more questions, we would like to share that video with you now. So take a listen.
The thing I've noticed at my age is that I did all this. I have done all that marching and singing, we shall overcome. And you guys have no idea. And to see it, nothing has changed. Everything is, it's just, it's very, 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 very frustrating.
So the reckoning is very familiar to us. And one of the things we find amusing is that a lot of young journalists are acting as if they've just invented this thing, and that they're more militant than anybody else. They have many more tools available to them, including social media. We didn't have social media. So history repeats itself, and we see this. I'm all for this new militancy. I just think they should go back and read the history and see what we did right and what we did wrong.
Journalism is a social commitment. It's not simply a way of making money and becoming famous, perhaps. It is a social commitment to make things better, to improve the lives of people, all people throughout, society. Develop a set of guiding principles which will guide you in your work, throughout your life as a working journalist. That is, to understand that journalism is a social calling, a calling which commits journalists to try to make things better for all people.
For all people, indeed. First, founder Allison Davis. How do you compare the calls for social justice this year to the actions you were demanding on December 12th of 1975? And also, what can you tell us about that first board meeting?
Well, interestingly enough, I think that Joe Davidson hit it on the head in terms of so many others who were with us in those beginning years. While I'm delighted as a founder to be able to, share in all of the festivities and to be honored, the first board, while made up of founders who lived in various areas of the country, were instrumental in finding others who could actually do and lay the foundation and do the work. We had, in fact, it was suggested in our November 1977 meeting that we put together a committee to craft a constitution. Constitution was not passed until 1978. Before that, we had sort of a business operating procedures that we had gotten from other organizations. But that committee was comprised of me, Roger Clendenning, Karen Howes, Linda Lockhart, Ranita Howes. Without them, we would not have been able to lay the very, very strong foundation that we have. And it wasn't voted on until February 17th, 1978. And I remember that at that time, there were not an awful lot of changes. We did absorb and talk about our structure, which I think was probably one of the most important things that we did. We elected in 1978 our first board, and I want to do a shout out to people like Region 1 Director, first Region 1 Director, Sarah Ann Shaw. Vince Sanders headed up Region 2. Joe Davidson headed up Region 3. Monty Tramer headed up Region 4. Milton Jordan headed up 5. Ann Walker, Region 6. Norma Wade, Region 7. Jean Fox Alston was Region 8 director. Sandra Dillard was Region 9. And Karen Howes was Region 10. And I think it's important to share those names because it was in those first few years that the foundation for this organization was laid, and a very strong foundation. And of course, there was Bob Reed, who helped look for early funding for the organization. And as you saw, he later became one of our national presidents. Roger Witherspoon was also very much involved in our Houston conference. And also, when I take a look at the archives, I see a few people who wanted to get involved in the organization. One such person was Oprah Winfrey, who at that time worked at WTUF TV in Nashville, Tennessee. So it's so important to realize that though it's such an honor to be here and to celebrate, I share that in that celebration with the folks that Joe Davidson talked about that we had to find to engage, and who happily became very engaged to make sure that this organization would have a very strong foundation. And I probably didn't answer your question fully, but I really had to get that out.
Oh, no, you did and more. And I'm like, Oprah Winfrey, I may have heard that name once or twice. So that's huge. Now, I'm also told that founder Norma Adams Wade has also joined us. So, Founder Wade, I would love for you to weigh in. The question is, how do you compare the calls for social justice this year to the actions you were demanding on December 12th of 1975?
The difference that I would point out between then and now, I would say the age range that occurs to me. The street action today involves in my view, a much younger crowd. I'm thinking back when we were involved, it was more like 30-ish, and to now it's teenage. That stands out to me very clearly. But the passion today, well, I wouldn't say the passion is the same, but I don't recall, and this just may be a lapse in memory, but I don't remember the property damage threat being as strong back then as now. But certainly the passion is there. I think more of a conversation today of where do we go from here after we leave the streets? Where do we go from here? How do we transpose that to legislation and law? But I know I walked many of the protests in the streets, and the passion was there, but the age range to me is younger.
Mm. Well, thank you for that, first of all. And then to me, just hearing you speak about those who are out there now and they're younger, I can't help but do a shout out as well. NABJ, for myself, I mentioned this earlier on, I got involved in high school. In the local chapter, they have NYABJ, a workshop for high school students. And so I think, I can say personally, NABJ does a great job about getting folks, from an early on age involved. And, I think it just goes to show how helpful that is, right? When you want to go out there and you're covering it and you're a budding young journalist in high school. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. So thank you for that. Now, we also asked Joel Dreyfus to give us his thoughts about diverse media and its relationship with the incoming Biden-Harris administration. Here's what he said.
There's a kind of sense of relief that, finally we're going to be rid of the guy who's calling us enemy of the people. But just because the Biden folks are friends or have friends in the media or are much nicer to the journalists doesn't mean that we should let up in our kind of aggressive pursuit of truth and what's going on behind the scenes in the processes.
Thank you so much, Founder Joel Dreyfus. Sam and Claudia, same question to you. What comes to mind when you think about diversity in media and its approach toward the new Biden-Harris administration? Sam, you first.
Okay, I'm going to go back to something else, if you don't
Go
mind.
for it.
You were talking
You're
about,
next.
a lot of people talking about George Floyd, and you were talking about the differences in now and then. Of course, I came from Minneapolis to NABJ. And the thing that was kind of interesting, I was really startled when I saw the George Floyd video, but I think that would have startled people anywhere. I mean, because I always thought Minneapolis was pretty, a pretty nice place to live. And, as a student at the University of Minnesota, I remember there was the two black papers in Minneapolis were owned by Republican women. And I used to write for Miss Jean Cooper, who was, she didn't pay me, but she fed me real well, and but I can remember a story that we worked on where some black man was being transported from one part of the police station to the other, and somewhere in the hallway he got beat up by the police. So we were writing that story. She was friends with police, and so she brought one of her cop friends over, and I interviewed him about the abuse. And I thought about that, and then I started thinking, I said, I complained about one of my neighbors, the way police treated her, and they locked me up. And so I was like, oh yeah, there are these things. But still, as I look back at the situation then, I still thought Minneapolis was a nice place, and quite frankly, even things like what happened to George Floyd, that's strange for something that would happen anywhere. And so that's one thing I wanted to mention. And then the other thing that you all talked about was pressure from some of the folks. And I thought the reaction in Minnesota, at least when I came to NABJ, was just pretty much indifference. I mean, there was no pressure one way or the other. They didn't really know much about it or care much about it. But, I don't know. Obviously, different things in different places. But that's what I had to say.
Well, speaking of pressure, I'm seeing in the chat, folks are commenting in reaction to my question about media diversity and, the approach toward the new Biden-Harris administration. And I'm seeing folks are saying they will continue to apply pressure there as well. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. What comes to mind when we think about diversity in media and how we'll take on, and cover the new administration?
Well, I think you cover it. The only difference is, I think the press is going to cover this administration, period. I mean, that's going to happen. I've lived here in D.C. for 40 years. They don't give anybody a break. It's just that Trump complained a lot. That's all I can say. I think a lot of people just considered, well, okay, that's what they have to say. That's it. But believe me, Biden's not going to get a break. It ain't going to happen. I mean, anything that people can, let's say, find that is negative about Biden is going to make the press. Positive things, they're responsible for making sure we know about that. But nevertheless, it's, he's not going to get a break. But again, I don't think he's going to be doing some of the things that Trump has done. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well. Certain people have more respect for government and tradition than others. And I think Trump had little. That's it.
Yeah. And Claudia, what about yourself? Any thoughts on that?
I think we have, and I apologize, I live on the side of a mountain, and so our internet connection is less than stable occasionally. So if I drop out, I'll just turn off my video and hopefully the audio will come through. This administration is going to face a number of challenges, and some of those should come from the journalists that cover it. Not some of them, a great number of them should come from the journalists that come. I don't think anyone gets to let their guard down for the next 4 years. I think on both sides, we have to know the facts. I think we need to pursue the truth. And the essence of telling a good story from the journalists that cover this administration in all aspects of journalism must be done at the highest level. I don't think anyone gets to slide. As Sam just said, there's not going to be any lesser coverage, if you will, or lesser investigation for this administration, and there shouldn't be. I'm a Californian now, and Kamala Harris was our senator, and we are looking forward to her being as thorough as a vice president as she was as a senator, and we look forward to the journalists that have covered her for years to continuing to be as let's just say, thorough as they have been in the past. And I think she's up to the task. And I certainly think that Joe Biden is. He certainly had a long enough time in Washington to practice.
Well, thank you so much for that. Checking in all the way from the mountains. Must be nice. Founder Joe Davison, would you like to add a point to this?
Well, I think I would just say that this whole, I guess is a bit of a change of subject, but this whole 45th anniversary and hearing from all of my co-founders and reading some of the texts in the chat, you know, it just impresses upon me what a family NABJ is. And whenever we can convene in person, I'll be glad when we can do that again, it's really evident. And I think this celebration, I appreciate everybody helped to develop the celebration, because I think it's for me, it's a reminder that NABJ is many things. It's an organization. It pushes for accuracy in media, fairness in terms of our coverage, advancement for Black professionals in this craft, but it's also very much a family, and I think we should just revel in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love every time the convention comes around, folks are like, I can't wait for the reunion, the big family reunion. That's what it really feels like. So I agree. So I want to get to some questions that are in the chat. Gerard Bolden asked the founders, in hindsight, what would you do differently in forming NABJ, if anything? And then knowing what you know now.
I'll weigh in on that. What would I do differently? Not much. I really don't think I would do much differently. Looking back from my vantage point now to then, of course, my co-founders will agree with me. I'm sure that there was a lot of, I wish I could think of a better word than bickering, but that's the only word that comes to me right now. But I defend bickering, for lack of a better word, because of the level of passion. Everybody knew we had to move forward on this. We wanted it to go a certain way, but most of us had our idea of how we wanted it to move forward. We disagreed strongly, vehemently about who to allow, and I may be, since I missed the beginning, I may be reiterating something that was already said, but the idea of who can be a member. Should we allow public relations people? Should we allow only major media membership? And nobody wanted to give up our position. But I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't change it, because it produced what we have today. And that hard fighting, that never say die, that I will not be moved from my position, did move us forward. So I just have to say I wouldn't change much. And I think we talked about the early years, and Allison was reading off some of those initial people. And I cannot get that image out of my mind. That first convention in Houston, we sat around a horseshoe table. A horseshoe table, that was our beginning. And now, I mean, we need bukus of hotels to hold everybody. So that uncharted water that we were in those early years, I wouldn't change it, because it brought us to where we are today.
Mm. You know, Gary D. Howard in the chat says, you can still hear the passion in all of our co-founders' voices. And Founder Adams, I could hear it in yours just now speaking. So Founder Allison Davis, would you like to weigh in before we move on to our next section?
You know, I mean, I think that, interestingly enough, I have been on a quest to make sure that some of the founders who we have lost and I don't mean by death, I mean simply lost, have been found. And so, I'm hoping she's on tonight, but Carol Bartel, I hunted her like a dog and I found her and heard her story about not only that day, but about her life as a journalist, which was incredibly touching. And so I share that to say that the only thing, that I wish we had back in those days, and probably in the first 2 decades, was money. It's so wonderful to know in 2020 that we're in the black. Because so many years was spent trying to figure out how to keep this organization going. And I saw something in the chat about somebody saying, well, what about Mal Johnson? Mal Johnson was our treasurer. And sometimes she would appoint herself the treasurer to continue to make sure that we weren't spending money in foolish ways. And I just remember, how important money was to us, and obviously continues to be. But we're breathing a lot easier now, obviously, because we're smarter in terms of raising money, and we're breathing a lot easier these days than we had in the past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And lastly, tonight, what it means to be one of the 44 founders of NABJ. First, here's founder Paul Brock, the man who gathered all of you at that table in Washington in 1975 that we've been talking so much about.
Happy anniversary, Methodist to NABJ, because I was one of the founders. Invested a lot of hard work in it. And always listen for work that they are doing. And they are steadily doing a great job. And I'm proud of them for that. So happy anniversary, NABJ. You're doing great work. Keep it up.
Keep it up and keep on keeping on. That is what we are doing. Now, I would love to open this up for any of the other founders who would like to speak, either for yourselves or for the group. Maybe something I asked, or as journalists, we can go off script. Something else you'd love to mention. How about Leon? How about you?
Well, I find it very inspiring listening to the testimony over the last 45 years. When it started in 1975, I had no idea that it would grow to an organization of 4,000 people. I thought it would be kept very small. I liked what Norma had to say about all the disputes that came about in several organizing efforts before 1975. And there was a lot of sorting out that had to be done as to what an organization should be and would be. And I remember a contentious meeting at the Pitts Motor Hotel in the late 1960s in Washington, D.C. I don't think it exists any longer, where there was a sharp demarcation in the group that met between those who were in public relations and those who were in journalism. So when the group got together in December 1975, there were nothing but journalists in the room. So there was no need to get into an argument or have a dispute about the formation of this and the purpose that it still serves today. Thank you for calling on me.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for being here, and to all of you for being here. Those who are in the chat, those who are, on this call, to all of our founders. And I have to mention Founder Ford. I noticed at one point you were like smiling when talking about maybe some of those disputes or going back, with some of those conversations. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, one thing I'm thinking about is I am glad that we're going back to Houston. That was our first convention. Obviously, the DC convention didn't work out this year. So next year, hopefully, we'll all be able to be in person in Houston. And that was our first convention. I think it was like Prairie View State or something like that. But anyway, I remember it was fun. I met a lot of the other people because, the first convention was kind of happenstance, right? I mean, because we just happened to be there, and certainly I just happened to be there. I wasn't part of anything. But the second convention were people who found out about things, right? And again, the first, I should say, the first convention, because it was just an organizing meeting in Washington. The first convention was in Houston. And so those were people who came in. And I remember people like Gail Pollard and Karen Howes, and, people that, were very significant in the organization. And we had a great time. And then afterward, as Ms. Wade was saying, we all had a big fight. Let's say they had a big fight. I was like 23 years old. I just sat there and listened to it. But nevertheless, there was a big fight about this is the worst thing, blah, 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 blah. Of course, then they went to Baltimore the next year, and that was the worst convention ever. And that continued for some years. And I've always said, I think it was 83. I think it was 80. My wife's sitting next to me. We're thinking about this. The 83 convention, I think, or 84 in Atlanta was very professional. And once those people in Atlanta took over, at that point, NABJ became a kind of a different organization. But before that, basically, it was just a gang, we hung out, we disputed, whatever. But we all liked each other, but we'd fight once a year.
Well, I see a lot of people in the chat, including Roland Martin, is very excited about Houston. I know that I am as well. We had a great virtual convention this year, and looking back to getting, back in person with this family. So thank you for that, for getting us excited. So now I want to squeeze in one more question from the live chat with you all. So Sharon Stephen asks, are there any challenges facing Black journalists today that were also present in 1975? Let's go with founder Allison. Your thoughts?
It's funny you should mention that. I went to the Millennial Conference and this year at Columbia University back in March. And I remember listening to your stories, the panels, and really being quite emotional. Because many of the things that we said in 1975 and many of the things that we did in 1975, we did it because we didn't want the future generation to have to go through what we were going through. And when I heard the stories and realized that you all were in fact going through some of the similar things that we went through, I was saddened by that. Saddened because, as much as we had hoped that we would pave the way for you totally, it had not happened in the nation's newsroom. Now, this was, of course, in March, and so there may have been some real changes between March and now in December. But I do remember being quite emotional by the fact that you were sharing, and your generation was sharing, what we had shared in 1975.
Well, I was there at the Millennial Summit. I remember you taking a moment to stand up and, and reflect and say some of what you said now. And, I have to say on behalf of my peers, as a task force member on the Young Black Journalist Task Force, that it means everything having moments like this, hearing from you all, our founders, and understanding that everything isn't always going to be perfect, and that challenges, we will face them again, right? Back to that question. But I think knowing that we have the support of you all and of this family helps make a difference. So, we so appreciate your presence at the Millennial Summits, of all of you, and for, taking moments to reach out and support us in any way that we can, because that's what family is all about. So thank you, founder. I appreciate that. Now I'm getting emotional. All right, y'all. So thank you all for participating in that lively discussion, that heartfelt discussion here in the video, in the chat room. You all have really helped to make this conversation as lively as possible. So I appreciate it. But now we'd like to take this moment to celebrate the life of a founder that we recently lost. John Clinton White was called home on November 21st. We'd like to thank his family for joining us this evening as we take a look back at his life.
Founder John White was a family man and a proud father. John was the husband and loving partner of Carolyn Jackson White, who he married in 1985. They had 2 children, Clinton and Aria. John also had 2 children from a previous marriage, the Reverend Anthony C. White and David White. And through Carolyn, he had a stepson, Ayin Wellman. He also leaves behind a host of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. His career in journalism began at the Afro-American in Baltimore, but during the founding of NABJ in 1975, he worked at the Washington Star as a reporter covering local news. John joined the Chicago Tribune as a reporter in 1980. It was there that he won acclaim for a Sunday magazine article that chronicled life in what was then the world's largest public housing project. In 1983, he and two other Tribune reporters were nominated for the Pulitzer Prize for a series of articles on housing fraud. John also worked at the Philadelphia Daily News, but then left journalism in 1987 to become the press secretary to the embattled Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. He got back into news, later producing for WJLA-TV in D.C. And John left journalism for the last time in 1990. When he went to work as the spokesman for Representative Curtis Collins of Illinois. He also held senior positions in public relations in Washington and St. Louis. In 1999, he was named Communications Director for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. John White was not only a co-founder of NABJ, he also launched what is now known as the Baltimore Association of Black Journalists. With Marie Cook, an editor for the Afro-American newspaper, and NABJ co-founder Dwayne Wickham. We owe him a debt of gratitude for his lifelong service, and we thank his family and wife Carolyn for sharing him with us. Founder John Clinton White was 78 years old.
I have to do a shout out. I saw Carolyn in the comments earlier this evening, so just a thank you again to Carolyn, to his family for being here, for your support. Now, I would like to welcome back Founder Long to present the Founder Appreciation Award.
Thank you, Kay. It is now my honor to introduce this year's recipient of the Founders Appreciation Award, Founder Dwayne Wickham. Dwayne, who has been a friend since our undergraduate days at the University of Maryland, is the founding dean of the School of Journalism and Communications at Morgan State University. He recently led the school through a successful accreditation process, and after 8 years, he will retire from that position next summer. He was a USA Today columnist for 30 years and was syndicated in more than 130 newspapers. And over the years, he has quietly helped hundreds of students at Morgan and North Carolina A&T. He has guided many young journalists through their first foreign assignments to expand their journalistic experiences. He raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to take young people to Cuba, Brazil, Panama, Barbados, to name a few, for the Institute for Advanced Journalism Studies that he founded. His journey with NABJ included serving as the national president from 1987 to 1989. He is one of only 4 founders who also served as president. These are just some of the highlights of Founder Dwayne Wickham's career. I now turn to Founder Wickham to say congratulations and thank you for all that you have done and will continue to do. Founder Wickham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandra. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Let me hold up my award. I thank NABJ. I thank my colleagues in the group of founders, 44 in all. And I think by this point in the program, you all know this celebration is about the many and not about the one. It's about the 44 journalists who came together in December of 1975 to create an organization that has endured for 45 years. You know, you heard from some of the founders today, and every one of them and every one of us has a story to tell. In fact, we all have several. And let me just share one with you, because I want you to understand that what happened on December 12th, 1975 was no coincidence. It came in the wake of many of us covering an event earlier that year called the National Black Political Assembly. It was an attempt on the part of Black leaders in this country, religious leaders, civil rights activists, political leaders, to form a third political party in America. One of them said they thought that it would be the legitimate left punch of American politics. And in this effort, they wanted to mount a presidential campaign led by a black politician in 1976. And so in that meeting, which took place in Cincinnati, Ohio, there was a lot of discussion, and ultimately they asked Julian Bond to be the candidate. And when he declined, they reached out to Ron Dellums, and then ultimately he declined. So they left with nothing in terms of a candidate, and little was left in terms of the political party that they were trying to create. But it left in the minds of many of the black journalists who were there covering that event a kind of a understanding for a need for us to come together in a way to bond over common interests. So that is what happened in December of 1975, and I just want to kind of put that a little bit in context. I don't want to leave this recognition ceremony, and I know my time is short, without making a pitch for this organization or others who support it to engage in an effort to create the NABJ story. The story that goes deeper than conversations that we can have in an hour, or even if we stretch it by a few minutes. A story that cannot properly be addressed in an NABJ journal or some other publication. This is the making of a documentary. Maybe this is something that might be done by one of our famous black documentary filmmakers, or maybe Sandy Nelson, as a for instance. Maybe it's something Ava DuVernay will take on, but it's a story that has to be told. And if you begin to think about some of the members of our organization, and I don't know everyone's story, but I know some of them. And I know what I know has not been told in its fullest. Chuck Stone, our first president, was long before the Black Lives Matter movement, was someone who understood how Black lives mattered. And so when he worked as a columnist in Philadelphia, it was often the case that people sought by the police would turn themselves into him at the paper because they believed that somehow he could safeguard them from police abuse. People were fearful of that. And Vernon Jarrett, who started his journalism career at the heels of W.E.B. Du Bois, and he used to tell me the stories about how he would work as a young aspiring journalist for W.E.B. Du Bois. In his later years, when Harold Washington ran for mayor of Chicago, the first attempt, legitimate attempt, one that had a real chance, it was believed, to win that race, Vernon was a columnist, but felt so strongly about the need for the victory that on the eve of the election, while at a rally to cover Harold Washington's campaign, took to the stage himself and let the race man in him come out. And call for black folks to rally behind this candidate. There's just a lot of stories like this. Les Payne, who went to Memphis to try to ferret out the truth about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And I went with him on some of those reporting trips. And then he dealt with the Symbionese Liberation Army. This is a wonderful story that has not been fleshed out in full detail and really has to be told. Joe Davison. Joe Davison sits before us, and it was mentioned that he was the Philadelphia Bulletin. What has not been said is that Joe and Claude Lewis were senior editors, founding editors of the National Leader, right. An attempt to create a national black newspaper that was published in this country. And I was a subscribing member. Or reader, I should say, of that publication. So there's just this wonderful story. Jeannie Thornton, one of our members. Jeannie Thornton was the first reporter of race, African-American reporter, hired by U.S. News and World Report, which was then the Fox News of journalism. So there's just wonderful stories that have to be fleshed out. I would encourage NABJ to seek out funding and seek out the producers and writers to tell these stories. These are wonderful stories. We should not allow more voices to be lost among our founders before these stories are told. And so I just want to thank you once again for this award. I could go on forever. I love talking about NABJ. I think about the conventions that we have and have had. I think about 1983 when William Marshall, who was famously known as Blackula in a film that he starred in, came to NABJ and in the park in New Orleans did a one-man Frederick Douglass show. I think about 1985 when we went to Dallas, Texas for a convention and had a black, we were invited, the entire convention, to a black rodeo. Who knew? Who knew they were black cowboys, real black cowboys? And so we were falling in love all over again with ourselves and our history, discovering things about the various sections of the country in which black folks have lived for, in fact, centuries. And so again, thank you very much for this honor. I'll hold it up again. I'm very proud of this. Thank you to my colleagues, my founding colleagues of NABJ, and thank you, Dorothy Tucker, our president, our esteemed president, for this great honor.
All right. Thank you, Dwayne, and congratulations again. And it takes a lot of people behind the scenes to put together a program such as this. So I want to do a few thank yous. First of all, a thank you to our producers, April Williams and Charlita Rodriguez. They worked very hard to gather all of us together and get the videos of some of the founders who could not be with us tonight. But it was important that you see and hear from as many founders who are still active as possible. And I agree with Dwayne, this is the beginning of putting together a documentary, more of a story about who we are at NABJ. A few more thank yous. Thank you to Denise James, Angela Robinson, to Dorothy Tucker, to Drew Berry, to Nate Chambers. The NABJ has given the founders an engraved pen commemorating this occasion. And also we will have dinner tonight on NABJ. So thank you very much. Thank you to Ava Greenwell, who supplied us with a few of the clips, to History Makers. And I want to thank my fellow founders for as many of you who were able to participate this evening. It is wonderful. Sharing these stories has been great. Even some of the stories that I don't remember, I got to hear this evening. So thank you for being here, but mostly thank you, NABJ, all of the membership, for keeping our organization going, for bringing all the energy that you do to this organization. And we will live on for another 45 years and another 45 years beyond that. So thank you. Thank you to our moderator, Kay Angram, who I've met for the first time this evening. You've done a fabulous job. We appreciate you. So thank you very much. And don't forget to sign our guest book. And that's it from me. Thank you. Kay?
Thank you so much, Founder Long. And on behalf of all Black journalists walking in your footsteps, I wanted to say thank you as well for your courage and sacrifice. That concludes our program this evening. And as many of the founders have said, we are going to keep on keeping on. Thank you for joining us. And please do not forget to get your tickets and join us for the NABJ Virtual Award Show next Saturday. We'll be paying tribute to our 2020 special honors, recipients, and Hall of Fame inductees. And you're not going to want to miss the star-studded list of hosts, including Emmy Award-winning actress Lynn Whitfield, NAACP Image Award-winning actress Tashina Arnold, CBS This Morning Saturday co-anchor Michelle Miller, and Kenneth Moten, co-anchor of ABC World News Now and America This Morning. Sounds like it's going to be a fun evening, and we hope you will join us. I hope you all have a great evening, and thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.